Welcome everyone, I'm Brian Walsh, and in this lesson we're going to go over how to round numbers. Now I know it might seem like rounding numbers has nothing to do with chemistry, but we have to deal with significant figures, which means we need to know how to properly round numbers.
So the first rule for rounding numbers says that if the next number is greater than 5, we round up. So in this example, they ask us to round 2.473 to 2 sig figs. So we're going to look at our number here, and first thing we're going to do is we're going to count off two significant figures. So we go 1, 2, and now we're looking at the next number, which is a 7. So this 7 is greater than 5, which means we're going to round this 4 up to a 5. And what we get is 2.5, which has 2 sig figs. The next rule tells us that if the next number is less than 5, we're going to round down. And when we say round down, that really means that the number stays the same. So in this example, they're asking us to round 4.827, again to 2 sig figs. So we look at our number just like before, and just like before, we're going to count off 2 sig figs. So we go 1, 2, and now we're looking at this 2 here. And because this 2 is less than 5, this 8 rounds down. And what that really means is this 8 stays the same. So our 8 stays an 8. And what we get is 4.8, which has 2 sig figs. Rule number 3 tells us that if the next number is 5, and that 5 is followed by more numbers, then we're going to round up. So in this example, we're rounding 7.35124 to 2 sig figs. So we look at our number, and we're going to count off 2 sig figs. 1, 2. So we look at the 5. So the next number is 5, right? Because I have a 5 here. And this 5 is followed by more numbers because we have numbers right here. So what that tells us then is that this 3 is going to round up to a 4. So what we get then is 7.4, which has 2 sig figs. So rules 4 and 5 deal with what to do if the next number is 5, and that 5 is the last number, or that 5 is followed only by zeros. So rule 4 tells us that if the number before 5 is odd, then we round up. So in this example, they're asking us to round 9.3500 to 2 sig figs. So we look at our number here, and we're going to count off 2 sig figs like before. And our next number is a 5. So our next number here is a 5, and it's followed only by zeros. So that means that this rule does apply. And we see that this 3 is odd, which means we're going to round this 3 up. So again, we count off 2 significant figures, and we look at the next number, and our next number is 5, and this 5 has only zeros after it. So that means that these rules apply. And because our 3 here, which is the number before the 5, because this 3 is odd, we round this 3 up to a 4. And we get 9.4, which has 2 sig figs. Rule number 5 tells us that if the number before the 5 is even, then we round down, which means it stays the same. So looking at this example, we're supposed to round 8.65 to 2 sig figs. So we're going to round this to 2 sig figs. We count off 2, 1, 2. Our next number here is 5. And because this number is 5, and there's nothing after it, right? So it's the last number. So these rules apply. Now we're looking at this, because this 6 is even, that means we're going to round it down. In other words, this 6 is going to stay a 6. So what we get is 8.6, which has 2 sig figs. Let's do a quick review of what we learned. And for all of these examples, we're going to round to 2 sig figs. So for 4.385, we count off 2 sig figs. And now we're looking at the next number, which is an 8. And because that 8 is bigger than 5, we're going to round this 3 up to a 4. And what we get is 4.4, which has 2 sig figs. In our next example, we're rounding 1.719. So we count off 2 sig figs. And now we're looking at the next number, which is this 1. And the 1 is less than 5, so this 7 rounds down, meaning that this 7 stays a 7. So what we get is 1.7, which has 2 sig figs. In our next example, we're rounding 5.2516. So we count off 1, 2. Our next number here is a 5. And we can see that this 5 is followed by more numbers. And so what that tells us then is that we're going to round this 2 up to a 3. And what we get is 5.3, which has 2 sig figs. In this next example, we're rounding 3.150. we count off 2 sig figs. Our next number is a 5, and that 5 is followed by a 0, which means that we have to look at the number before the 5. And in this case, we have a 1 before the 5, and because 1 is an odd number, we're going to round this 1 up to a 2. And what we get is 3.2, which has 2 sig figs. And in our last example, we're rounding 2.45, so we count off 2 sig figs. Our next number is a 5, and this 5 has nothing after it, it's the last number. And so now we're going to look at the number before the 5, and because the number before the 5 is even, this 4 is going to round down, which means it's going to stay a 4. So what we get is 2.4, which has 2 significant figures.
If you have any questions about anything, or if you have any feedback that you'd like to give me, please leave me a message. You can leave a comment, or you can email me at chemistrymadeeasy118@gmail.com. Thanks for watching.